Hey guys, in this video, I'm going to be going over some correlations I've uncovered between the frequency of my bowel movements and certain dietary factors such as my total carbohydrate intake, my total fiber intake, and my total magnesium intake. I also took a recent stool test to learn about the composition of my microbiome. So I'm going to be sharing some insights from that in relation to constipation as well. So constipation doesn't seem like it's too serious of a condition unless you have it, right? And if you do, it could be an absolute nightmare. So I want to state up front, I personally don't struggle with constipation, but several members in my immediate family do, and I know how distressing it is for them. So I wanted to make this video because I think I have something I could bring to the table. What I decided to do was I decided to look into it and see if there's any quantifiable correlations I could make between my diet, my lifestyle, and the frequency of my bowel movements. Okay. So what I'm going to show you first is the raw data that I collected. So in this column right here, column T, this is my personal collection of symptoms. I record my symptoms every day on a basis of 1 to 10, except for this column right here. This is my bowel movement column. I literally have a column for this. Since March 2nd of this year, every day I've tracked whether I've had a bowel movement 0, 1, or 2 since March 2nd, okay? So that's this entire column right here. So every one of those individual digits represents that, okay? Yeah, so if you're struggling with constipation, I would actually highly recommend that you do this. It's very enlightening. It opens your eyes to kind of things that you're doing that correlate to your bowel movements. It helps you just kind of see where you're at from a bird's eye view. Okay, now there's some studies that have shown that if we go to a different sheet, my digestive biomarker sheet, right? There's been some studies that have correlated certain bacteria in the intestines with constipation. So there's two large classes of bacteria in the intestines, the firmicutes, I think I'm saying that right, and the Bacteroidetes. So those are your two large classifications. Some studies have shown that those who struggle with chronic constipation have more firmicutes and less Bacteroidetes in their GI tract. Okay, so for a control group without constipation, it was shown that they had higher Bacteroidetes than firmicutes. Okay, so I took a stool sample recently, had it sent to the lab, so I wanted to kind of show you my results from June 12th. If we go over to the firmicutes column over here, I have this listed alphabetically, or it should be. If we go to the firmicutes column over here, what you can see is that my firmicutes were actually low. So if it's yellow, that means it's low. My firmicutes came in low at about 17 billion. I know that doesn't sound like it's low, but whenever you're talking about the microbiome, that's actually low, believe it or not. That shows you how many bacteria are in your intestines. So mine were 17 billion. The reference range is anywhere from 57 billion to 304 billion. So my 17 billion is below average, okay? And then if we go to the Bacteroidetes, over here, I think it is, yep. The Bacteroidetes, right? Mine clocked in at 1.8 trillion, okay? Yeah, 1.8 trillion, you heard that right. So the reference range for that should be 861 billion to 3.3 trillion, okay? So I was kind of right in the middle, but it was definitely a little bit, a little more elevated. Now, so what this shows is basically my Bacteroidetes was higher than my firmicutes, which is what we would expect from the literature If you have a higher ratio of bacteroidetes to firmicutes, you're less likely to struggle with constipation. And if you have higher firmicutes to bacteroidetes, you're perhaps more likely to struggle with constipation. Although there's probably, there's exceptions to every rule, but just wanted to show you that to you guys. Okay, now let's go on to the main portion of this, right? So this is kind of like day-to-day things that I've discovered. Okay, so I made a few charts here. So the highest correlation I've personally found between the frequency of my bowel movements and my diet actually has to do with my total carbohydrate intake, believe it or not. So basically, the long and the short of it is the more carbohydrates I eat, the more I go. So you can see here in this chart, on days where I have 0 bowel movements, right, my average carbohydrate intake in grams is about 127 grams. Days when my carbohydrate intake is around 160 grams, usually I have 1 bowel movement. And on days when I have 2 bowel movements, which is kind of rare, I'm eating upwards of 296 grams of carbohydrates. Okay, I should point out that none of these are particularly high. I would say that these are moderate to low carbohydrate intakes here. I'd say that 300 is definitely moderate to maybe a little bit high. But the correlation, generally speaking, is that the more carbs I eat, the more I go, which kind of makes sense because in some ways, total carbohydrates takes into account a lot of different things. So it's kind of a big category, but I just thought that was generally interesting. This is my highest correlation. Okay, second highest correlation was actually between my total fiber intake per day and my bowel movement. So on days when I don't have any bowel movements, I'm eating an average of 26 grams of fiber. Okay. Days when I have 1 bowel movement, I'm eating an average of about 30 grams of fiber. And on days when I have 2 bowel movements, I'm eating about 33 grams of fiber. So the correlation isn't as robust as the other one, as total carbohydrate intake, but there's still definitely a correlation. You hear all the time, like, hey man, if you struggle with constipation, you need to eat fiber. Well, I don't think it's exactly that cut and dry, but there is definitely a little bit of a correlation between the two, at least in my case, when it comes to me, right? So there you go. And then lastly, I wanted to also mention magnesium. Magnesium is a laxative of your body, generally speaking, and anecdotally, I've heard people say that if you take magnesium, it helps with bowel movement frequency. So I wanted to test that. I also track my magnesium intake every day. As you can see, so this one's a little interesting. My magnesium intake, I don't think this is grams, I think this is micrograms, or milligrams, excuse me. 291 milligrams of magnesium a day. On average, I won't have a bowel movement if I'm eating that much, right? But if my magnesium intake is 359 milligrams per day, I generally have 1 bowel movement. And on days when I have a little bit less, or when I have 2 bowel movements, usually eating around 277 mgs, right? So this one's a little interesting. It's kind of like it's a curve, right? So not exactly sure how robust this correlation is. That seems a little weird that it would look like this distribution, but sometimes you'll see that with different things. Sometimes correlations aren't linear; they're kind of logarithmic, meaning that they make curves, right? So there's several things in biology that do that. So those are my correlations. Those are correlations I want to go over. I definitely want to leave you guys with the idea that it's not necessarily the goal of this video wasn't necessarily that you increase your carbohydrates or you increase your fiber necessarily, or that you increase your magnesium. The goal is that you create something like this for yourself. that's the most important goal. Start tracking your bowel movements every day. Even start tracking the quality of your bowel movements if you want to. Start tracking what you're eating. Track your fiber intake, track your carbohydrates, see if there's a correlation. Track honestly, as many things as you can. Try to get down. Even if you can't use them up front, the data in the long run is going to help you out a lot. It's going to help you make those correlations. So I hope this video was helpful for you guys. If it was, make sure to subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be making more quantified health videos like this in the future. I wish you guys all the best, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you.